Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Highland Reserve. With the addition of the Highland cattle and their boxy barn in the last episode, we are now done with the locally sourced, readily available farm animals. For now anyway. Who knows what will become available in the future. So, what does this mean for our future? Well, we will now have to rely solely on our reputation as animal keepers and conservationists to acquire new animals, build relationships with breeders and other zoos, similar to our friendly neighbourhood farmers, from whom we acquired 4 of our current species, and some of our farm favourites too. We'll also take opportunities to relocate or rehabilitate displaced animals where possible, for animals that might be a threat to livestock, like the badgers and the foxes, and animals in need, like the donkeys. So there are plenty of opportunities out there. It'll just be about being in a position to take them when they appear. I'm still also on the lookout for new facilities in need of management or creation that I can lead or be a part of, so the future could go in a whole array of different directions. Anyway, that's where we're at. But today we're obviously taking on a new species, so let's get into it. Just north of the beautiful city of Edinburgh is a centre that specialises in a certain type of animal. Known for their wide variety of deer species, both native and imported, they have mastered the care of these animals, and I am honoured to accept some that they are unable to take on. Any facility that takes on animals is going to have a maximum capacity, and for this centre, the main stress points are the local species. Both fallow deer and red deer are more prevalent in the local area, and so when they get rescued for whatever reason, they all go to the centre. So today we are taking some of both. I think I mentioned in the swan video that we would be extending our wild area a bit, and this is why. I didn't want to have a farm-like paddock, though it would have been in keeping with the theme of the reserve. No. This needed to feel like a natural woodland environment, like the badger habitat, but where that could be contained and set within a relatively small environment. This would need to be a bit more open, and in some ways a lot more scenic. I had thought to split the 2 enclosures and have a guest walk through both, like a nature walk. I'm still not convinced that the guests can be trusted, so I'm going to err on the side of caution for now and perhaps try with something a little less prone to stress, as deer, from my recollection at least, suffer quite a bit from an overabundance of people. And I can empathise, so I'm not going to hold it against them. In natural environments, I prefer to create or make use of natural water sources. So, like in the badger and swan enclosures, I had to create the deer habitat around a small, still pool and a calm stream, which was also a very deliberate excuse for me to get the rocks out and go bananas. Well, maybe not full bananas, but I did get to throw down a few features. So let's say 1.5 bananas. The stable I built so that it blocked the view from the main thoroughfare. This was by design, because I want people to use the woodland path and not just stop and block up the central walkway. As small as this zoo is, it's not free from congestion, so guiding people off the central route a bit will help to counter that. I tried to build an entry into this enclosure through the stable, with a bit of an observation window into the bedding area so keepers can check in without causing too much disturbance. What I learned, eventually, is that the door to the enclosure cannot be the first door in the airlock. Apart from the obvious drawback of releasing the animals into that small space from which they cannot leave on their own, it turns out, for a reason that still eludes me, this prevented almost every piece of enrichment, including the feeding troughs, from being accessible by the animals or the keepers, regardless of where I put them. The keepers would walk in with food, dump it on the floor beside the trough and leave. It took me longer than I would care to admit to give in to the demands of the ones and zeros and move the entrance forwards. But thankfully, when I did, it released the hostages and my deer could once again scratch themselves thoroughly. Incidentally, the scratching post around the tree is another cool feature that I learned from watching the pros. By the way, for those of you who watched the whole way through these videos, first of all, thank you. I'm still in the learning phase of video making, so I appreciate that it's not all action and edge of your seat entertainment, but you will start to notice a difference soon. I won't say too much more than that because it will give away a lot, but I've been planning new ways to make these speed build style videos a bit more interesting. Also, if you are someone who watches to the end, you may have noticed in the Highland Cow episode, I discovered, finally, the Scenic or cinematic cameras. I wish I had known about these from the start. I have had a play with them in the next couple of videos, just to get a feel for how to use them, but they are going to change how I make the videos in the future. And if you didn't watch all the way through, I'll suggest you go back and watch the rest of the cow episode, see what I mean. And then you can come back here, because there is more coming very soon. Anyway, we're in the middle of something here. Stop distracting me. My attention span's already short enough as it is. I need to give the deer some shelter. I wanted to make sure they still had plenty of freedom, as they would in the wild, so I left the stables very open, hopefully with some ability to hide from the guests. As I mentioned earlier, the deer are quite easily stressed. Although I think they do it to themselves sometimes. But this stress created some issues with the fences. I made two versions, the simple chain link for the guest viewing, and closed wooden panel fences to create privacy and prevent the guests from grouping at inconvenient areas. I ended up having to replace a lot of the chain link with the panels, as both types of deer were having issues. And I don't want to bring the mood down, but I think the deer were having a bit of a strong reaction. Every time I got the alert for the stressed animals, I would find that animal sitting in the middle of the pond. Just sort of sitting there, limply. I want to believe that they were doing that thing where you look out the window in the rain and pretend you're in a sad music video. Because the alternative is slightly more concerning. I did consider that it might be the water itself that was causing the stress, and that's why they always ended up there. But it seemed to stop with fewer guests peering in, so... I had a couple of scenic focal points in mind when planning this enclosure. Well, I say planning, I mean the thoughts that just sort of arose as I was making it. The first of these points would be the central pond. I wanted a bit of a clearing in the woods vibe going, where if the sun or the moonlight hits it right, it could almost be in a magical fantasy story setting. The other one was the bridge. I had a very clear idea of what I wanted. An old stone bridge, a bit like an old Roman bridge. Smaller, but somehow everything always seemed to come out a little bit Japanese. Maybe you'll see what I mean when it's finished. I ended up changing it to be something a little less refined, a little more rugged and slapped together using what I can imagine would be excavated stone. Which turned out quite nice actually. I think, especially when you tie it into the scenery of the enclosure, it trickles down nicely into the stonework that lines the stream and the pond. I don't know if there's a setting to make the raised paths a bit flatter, but I find the thick concrete underbelly of the pathing to be a bit restrictive from a design perspective. It'd be great to have a thinner variant that could be used for more delicate scenery, you know what I mean? I get that as I'm still very early in my zoo building career, I'm more than happy to, fall back onto lots of rocks to fix my problems. I don't mean for that to sound... I mean, it can feel like a cop-out if the building isn't going perfectly to just cover it with rocks. Not... Oh no. It's a deer in the pond all over again. Rocks! Rocks and foliage are a key part to designing any habitat. and they go a long way towards the detailed part of the overall appearance of the habitat. But sometimes they can be a bit overused to make up for our lack of building skills, and I'm happy doing that for now, on occasion, but I'd like to improve the building as well. That's what I was trying to say. Anyway, I've been thinking a lot about the future of this series, and I have a lot of cool ideas for builds in the near and distant future. And I'm really looking forward to getting stuck in. However, I'm trying to remember how franchise mode works. When I move on to a new zoo, the conservation credits stay, and the money always starts at 40,000, which makes sense, I suppose. You wouldn't necessarily use money from one zoo in another, especially if it's in a different country, even within the narrative of this series being what it will be, eventually. It does mean that any future zoos will need to start from the ground up, similarly to this one. I mean, the Highland Reserve doesn't even have an entrance at this point, and we're 10 episodes in. I should probably do that at some point, actually. It's a mechanic that we will have to play around. I don't want to take loans, but I'm aware that that is an option if it comes to it. But I like to start off in the future with a properly designed enclosure, rather than, you know, the small money gainers that we started with here. You know, little enclosures that don't offer a lot of growth, just to generate a bit of starting cash. Although I guess we could do upgrade videos, so maybe it's not too bad. Let us see. We're an undisclosed amount of time away from worrying about any of that anyway, so we'll address it when we need to. Also, I'm aware that exhibit species are good money builders, but as you may have gathered already, each location will have a specific curated selection of animals. So not every zoo is going to have exhibit species. Kind of like the reserve. That being said, if we ever find ourselves in desperate need, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to import a species or two for the guest services area perhaps, just to keep us afloat. We'll have to see what unfolds. I feel like deer are quite an underrated animal generally. They must be the largest wild animal in the UK. The red deer. Probably one of the most majestic. I don't know if you've ever seen a photo or something of a red stag in a woodland. It's no wonder it became such a prize or a status or trophy for even royal hunters. I mean, take something like Game of Thrones. It's obviously fiction, but based on real medieval Britain, the stag symbolism throughout it's got a very strong symbolism for what is essentially a prey animal. But at the same time, it's quite understated. You know, it's not in your face. Not like some of the animals that have been adopted as their national representatives of the British countries. Let's just remind everyone of those very realistic, totally valid animals, shall we? Believe it or not, the English lion is the most reasonable of the animals, having once existed in the UK. But not in the past, 12,000 years or so. Wales and Scotland, on the other hand, went in a slightly different direction. Scotland adopted the unicorn for their national animal. And never one to be shown up, Wales somehow chose the less realistic option, the dragon. When are we getting that DLC? It is nice that these two deer species can be kept together. Feels a little bit like when you go to the dog park and you see all the different breeds playing. I will say, however, the fallow deer, the females in particular, bear a striking resemblance to the baby red deer. It's often difficult to tell them apart at a glance, which I imagine would be quite alarming if you were a fallow deer. You know what's crazy? I look back at my emails to see when I got Planet Zoo. I bought it on launch in 2019. That's 6 years, give or take a few months. I don't know why, but that sounds wild to me. I feel like games don't hold up that long anymore. I'm so used to a new Call of Duty every year or these indie games appearing and blowing up and then disappearing within a few months. Just seems surprising to me that a game can still have this sort of longevity. I've been expecting a Planet Zoo 2 every year, but they keep dropping new DLC. Don't get me wrong, I love that. We invest so much time and effort into our creations that it's great to be able to hold on to them and see them grow and evolve over time. And it's a little sad to think that one day they'll shut down in place of something new. For example, now I don't play Planet Coaster, but think of all the theme parks people built on the first game that will never reopen since the new version. All the Zoo Tycoon zoos, all the Jurassic Parks. This is another reason I wanted to do a YouTube series. All the things I've built or done in games, and it all brought a temporary joy or a short-lived satisfaction. But here it lives on. For a little while longer at least. And maybe someone seeing this, seeing my average building, will be inspired to do it for themselves, you know? If I can do it with a outdated technology and zero experience and no personality, anyone can. Well, as much as I'm trying to keep the voiceovers going as long as possible, the more detail I work into my enclosures, the longer these videos seem to get, and I end up waffling. I have no idea what I've even been talking about today. I'm trying to keep these videos around 20 minutes. The farming sim videos have no time limit, but they're far more casual. These I'm trying to make something I can be proud of, you know. I'm not quite there yet, but as I say, improvements are coming soon, so hopefully we'll get there. Don't forget to stick around for the cinematic camera shots at the end. I'm having a lot of fun making those routes and flying about, and I think they look really good. Really good. I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Make sure to subscribe for lots more coming up, and I will see you again at the same time next week.
Sizowaka